And I think that we're recording. Okay.
You can tell because there's a little REC in the corner.
That's right. So we are at. Okay, we're at page 3B1 on the right-hand side in the middle of that column. And just to recap where we left off, we're in the middle of a whole discussion. The trigger for it.
Sorry to interrupt. How do I get that? The Talmud.
It was sent to you.
Okay.
I sent you a PDF, but I think it's also downloadable from the Shomrei archive somehow, right, John?
Yeah, I'm looking for the link to. I'll put it in the comments.
Okay, thank you. So the topic, of course, we're in the Tractate Megillah. So the topic is about how important reading the Megillah is, and what we begin to understand, according to the way the Talmud works it out, is that by reading, and of course it's a little bit circular, by reading a verse in the Megillah itself as if it were a verse from God, we look at each little phrase in that verse. What is the meaning of this? What is the meaning? Why did this phrase have to be written? Why did this phrase have to be written? By treating the Megillah itself as a sacred scripture, which of course it became, we end up figuring out that reading the Megillah applies everywhere to everyone, and it should be a top priority. This is because it says, every state, every country, every city, every family should be reading the Megillah. So each of these phrases has been milked for meaning by the rabbis to extend the idea that the Megillah reading is so important. All right.
How do I get you back?
You're here. You're back.
But I can't see. Oh, there you are. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so the idea is that the Megillah reading is truly a top priority. Then what we started doing is we started seeing that we could then line it up with other mitzvot and wonder about, well, if they come in conflict with each other, which one should we choose? So we had a whole discussion about how important Mikra Megillah, the reading of the Megillah, is compared to, for instance, let's say, priests that had to do the temple service. If we could figure out a conflict, let's say we could imagine a situation where either the sacrifice gets offered or the Megillah reading gets read. They haven't been able to do either one yet. Then which one comes first? And the answer is, surprisingly, reading Megillah has priority over the Torah obligation of bringing the sacrifice in the temple. Right? This is the amazing statement that the Talmud comes up with. Then we had a corollary from that Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, by the way, those who were in the previous session, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, the editor of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda, the patriarch, Rabbi Judah, the prince, who was the editor-in-chief of the Mishnah itself, the first rabbinic product of rabbinic Judaism. In his household of scholars, they decided that therefore they should stop studying Torah and working on whatever they were doing to go and listen to the Megillah. Megillah reading became more important than studying the Torah. So then we got into challenges about that, right? And we said, wait a second, how can you possibly say that? We have other teachings which indicate that there is nothing more important than studying the Torah. So, for instance, a teaching that is not quoted here, but which is a generic kind of teaching that we have in our traditional prayer book. We say it's a Mishnah at the beginning of Peah, the tractate that deals with leaving the corners of your field for the poor. And it says, Elu dvarim she'elaim shiur. These are the things that have no set limit. So leaving a corner of your field, the Torah doesn't tell us how big the corner has to be. And I'm not going into the other examples, but then it says, and studying Torah. We're supposed to study Torah every day, but it never tells us how much Torah is the minimum amount of Torah, or how much Torah is the maximum amount of Torah. Never tells us any of that. So that's the way the Mishnah starts. Then there is a comment on that. Not only are they don't have a limit in the sense of we're not told what's the minimum, what's the maximum. They have no limit in their reward. The reward that you get for praying with intention, with helping the poor people, with helping people that need your support, to get married, to bury the dead, to do all of these things, milut chasadim, all of these things. What you do has no limit to how much good you're doing, and the reward that you get is limitless. And then it says, "V'talmud Torah keneged kulam." But of all the good things that you can possibly do in the world, Talmud Torah, studying Torah, is equal to all of them combined. So there's a statement that Talmud Torah is, of course, of the primary importance. And how does that, how does that work out with our statement here that no, Mikra Megillah, reading the Megillah comes first, and you have to stop everything else for that. We finally got to a distinction at the end of our study the last time we studied, where we made a distinction. Well, first, before that, the distinction right before that was it's a distinction between individual Talmud Torah study, Talmud Torah, and collective study of Torah, right? That the individual is on a lower level of importance than the Talmud Torah of the entire people, right? But then we had another statement, because then we saw that even a funeral of one individual Torah scholar stops everything, including reading Megillah. So how do we understand that the order of importance? And the last thing we read was the paragraph right before the break on the right-hand side, which says that honoring the Torah is more important or more stringent for us to take care of than study the Torah. When we honor a Torah sage who has passed away by stopping everything and going and participating in their funeral, that is of primary importance, and we stop even reading the Megillah to do that. However, an individual who studies Torah, who's in the middle of learning some Torah, that's not as important as Mikra Megillah. That individual has to stop their study and go and listen to the Megillah itself. So how do we understand that distinction? How do we understand that distinction? In a certain sense, I think that it's a little bit arguable, counterintuitive. What's more important, honoring something symbolically or actually doing it? And yet here we're saying that the individual who's studying Torah, that's dispensable, so to speak, at least for now, right? But honoring the Torah of one person, that takes priority over everything. That's not something that we can put off to the side. So if you look at the notes, note 14, can somebody read that for us? Who's going to volunteer to read? And guess what? After that, you'll be the reader for the rest of the session. Note 14 at the bottom of page 3B1. Thank you, Josie. You got it? Unmute yourself, please. The bottom of the screen. There you go. You did it.
Note 14. The reason why the honor given to a Torah scholar is of greater importance than the study of Torah itself can be explained as follows. The honor due to a Torah scholar is for all the Torah he has learnt throughout his life, whereas the act of Torah study is limited to what is currently being studied.
Okay, and that's the credit to one of the commentaries.
More.
Rabbi, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so, I mean, I would have thought that when you talk about honoring Torah as opposed to studying it, you would mean acting in a way that's consistent with the mitzvot, right? So honoring the Torah would mean keeping kosher and Shabbat and so forth. But here they're using it in a surprising way, which is to say honoring the Torah means to honor the memory of a Torah scholar, which isn't the most, I mean, if there's a distinction between, if you have a choice between keeping kosher, observing Shabbat on the one hand versus actually studying Torah on the other, then, there might be a conflict there. The conflict between honoring the memory of a Torah scholar just seems like a different concern, and it's hard to see why that should be more important than actually studying Torah itself.
So I think it's actually interesting that I think that you're taking the words here in a kind of a backwards way.
Okay.
From what they would normally mean, and it's because of the way that we use that language. When we use the language of honoring the Torah, I think we usually use it in the way that you're talking about it. Honoring the Torah, following the Torah's ways, being faithful to the Torah, and so on. I think that you're right, that's our common usage of the term, but that's not the literal usage. The literal usage of the term is exactly what the Talmud is talking about. Giving honor to the Torah, not Shabbos and not Kashrus and not love your neighbor as yourself, but the Torah, honor the Torah. So for instance, that's what we do when we open the ark and all of us get up,
right?
Hopefully. So that's not about Shabbos and it's not about Kashrus. It's about giving honor to the Torah. And there it's the literal clunky object that is the Torah itself, which is being honored as if it were a king, right? As if it were so that's the idea of honor. It's really literally that. When the sages talked about honoring your parents, they said actually you're not obligated to listen to everything your parent tells you to do. If your parent tells you to do something stupid, then don't do it. But you should get up when your parent walks in the room.
Okay, so that's helpful explanation. And it suggests that, yes, in terms of honoring the physical object of the Torah, we have certain obligations. But taking it a step beyond that and saying that we have to honor the Torah scholar is a little bit self-serving for the rabbis to offer, right? I mean, they are the Torah scholars who are going to be honored.
Right. So I've been thinking about that every once in a while. I wrote an article a while back, and I'm using this very freely. In philosophy, there's a term, the hermeneutics of suspicion. Hermeneutics means making sense of something. Usually it means making sense of a text, but it can mean making sense of anything, right? That you can take that word hermeneutics and apply it to reality, apply it to everything. Sure. So one philosopher, a contemporary philosopher, Paul Ricoeur, he pointed out that there are three great thinkers of suspicion in modern times: Freud, Marx, and Nietzsche. And what he said about each of them was that each of them said people think that they're doing this or they're saying this or they believe in this, but really they're really doing X, Y, Z. So of course Freud is an easy one, right? You think when you do something, you're doing it because you want to, but no, it's really because you're jealous of your father or something like that. So that's so the word suspicion is, no, I understand what you're really out for. You really have some other agenda that you're out for. And Nietzsche said the same thing. Nietzsche said that about religion. Nietzsche said that about morals. That moral people say you should be moral because they're weak and they don't want to be beaten up all the time. And instead of going to the gym and getting strong, they guilt people into being moral so that they don't have to get strong. So it's all self-serving. So there's a certain amount, and of course Marx also said all of the stuff was basically the property people and the rich people protecting their own power and so on. So that has been definitional for modern thought. We've all adopted that, even in the most superficial way, and obviously in ways that any of these thinkers may not have even been contemplating and may not be happy with. We take it in a very superficial, common kind of way, but it feeds. And here's where I would be suspicious of the suspicion. It feeds a kind of a happy feeling that we have. Oh, they're not really so much better than me. And what they're doing is really just for their own good. Yeah. They're really putting this out there because they're just trying to enhance their own status, protect their own power. But it's not really legitimate in any kind of compelling way. So there's a circle here where each of those great thinkers were in many ways liberating. They opened our eyes and they freed our thoughts to see much better and much more than what we might otherwise have been doing. And yet no good idea is immune to abuse. And the same kind of self-servingness that those ideas try to highlight comes back and applies that very concept to everything else. So I think that bringing it back now here to this, when the rabbis say you should respect Torah scholars, you can be very suspicious and you can be very cynical and say, of course the rabbis are saying that because they're the rabbis. So it's not really that respecting the Torah is a real legitimate value. It's just a game that was invented by the rabbis so that they should be, treated with in ways that'll make them feel good and make them have status in society. The problem, again, to that is twofold for me. First of all, dismissing that concept as not a good concept and as being totally identified only with a self-serving agenda is, I think, really a bad thinking. I think it's really crummy. I think that it ignores whatever value there is in the concept itself, which says, you know what, you should respect people who are trying to teach a holy way of life, who are trying to teach a moral way of life. Again, if you don't want to be saying, oh, morality is just a bunch of hooey. If morality means something, then the exemplars of morality and the people that are teaching morality are performing a great service. So that's number one. I think that just throwing out the idea as being meritless and as being reducible just to the fact that they want their own power is reductive and unfair. Second of all, if we've been studying Talmud together for a while, we notice that the rabbis are very self-conscious about their own failings and their own status. They were very human about it. Nobody likes to be treated like a shmata. People like to be appreciated. In the previous session, somebody thanked me for teaching, and I said, you know what? I really appreciate that you thanked me. I'm a human being. I like to be, hear a word of thank you every once in a while for something that I'm doing, and I wonder whether it's any good. So yes, human beings are human. All of us are inescapably human. But the self-consciousness that the rabbis had about their humanity and about the dangers of falling into an ego trip or falling into a power trip. It was something that they were very, very conscious of, and that they did a lot to show that that's not what they were trying to do, and that they tried to remind themselves that they could be tempted into doing that and then try not to do it. Back to, again, earlier this morning, that's going to be one of the themes in Pirkei Avot. That's one of the themes in the what's called the Ethics of the Fathers. I don't like that translation, but the fundamental teachings of the rabbis about morality and ethics. What is going to be one of the leitmotifs is going to be, about the danger of falling into that kind of hubris. So,
well, I hope I get to make a somewhat of a rebuttal, because I don't know whether you're ascribing that kind of cynicism to the question, because I didn't, that's not cynicism that I share. I just think that there's of course the rabbis of the Talmud are very interested in their own biographies or the biographies of their teachers. I think that they're not so much interested in celebrating themselves, but the teachers whom they admire. I think that's I don't think that entails the same kind of cynicism that you just described. But think about our heroes in our own day. So we can have Black History Month and we can celebrate Martin Luther King, and we can celebrate the great leaders whom we admire, Gandhi or whoever. That's one thing, but if we think that's a substitute for actual social action or real conduct that makes a difference in the world, I think that it's not. And to say that if you have a conflict between Torah study and honoring the rabbis of the Talmud, that's different from saying this is just about the self-interest of the rabbis in promoting their own fame and glory. I don't think that's not what I had in mind. I think there's a genuine conflict here between we do want to honor the rabbis of the Talmud. It's appropriate to do, but when there's a real conflict between doing that and performing mitzvot, that conflict is real, and it can't be written off as cynicism. So.
No, I don't. I think I'm sorry, but I don't think that you're being sharp enough here. First of all, I'm not saying you're being cynical. I'm just saying that kind of way of talking is part of the generic cultural, arsenal that we have today about talking about people in who have stature and power, and I was warning against that. The acknowledgement of the conflict that you just mentioned is exactly the point of this discussion. It's acknowledging that there's a conflict and then trying to say, okay, practically speaking, it's very nice to talk about it, but in the end, what do you do? What comes first? And their answer is, and this was also part of what I was hearing from your question, their answer is giving honor to the Torah takes precedence here. Giving honor to the Torah is a mitzvah in itself, distinct from studying the Torah. Giving honor to the Torah is an obligation that we have. Now, it's not just about the rabbis in the Talmud. They're talking about an anonymous person who was recognized in their community as being somebody who dedicated themselves to studying the Torah. And then he passed away. And the call that they put out is, you know what? Everybody should turn out for that funeral. Even if you didn't know the person, even if you weren't best friends with the person, you're turning out for this person for the very simple reason that this person represents Torah. That's what his life was. Even if he didn't become famous, even if he's not mentioned even once in the entire Talmud, this is a person who dedicated his life to the Torah. we honor that.
Okay.
And we are obligated to honor that. And that's the other part of this. The rabbis made Torah study the most democratic thing they could. It's not a closed esoteric club. It's not a biologically determined class of people who are rabbis. Anybody and everybody is invited to be somebody who dedicates themselves to the Torah. To get back to that note 14, I think that explanation is totally inadequate. I think that the real issue is something that we've been talking about, what Stuart brought up, and that what we've been talking about is the reason that honoring the Torah comes even before studying the Torah is because that is the kind of meta value that is the overarching value that orients everything else. And that is the dedication that we need to affirm. It's like a pledge of allegiance. It's to stand in honor of the Torah is to affirm and celebrate the fact that the Torah is the center and the guiding. Literally, the word Torah means instruction, the guiding instruction for everything and anything before we even get to what the details are. That's why we say at Sinai, Na'aseh v'nishma. Okay,
We hear
take the Torah. Now let's go in and see what the Torah has to say.
Okay.
So the first part of this is just simply putting the Torah literally on a pedestal. And that means that any single person who did that in their life is an example, an exemplar of that. And in terms of when the rabbis existed and the critical moment that they came into was what this could never be taken for granted. What Judaism was going to look like, or what the religion of the Jewish people was going to look like, was up for grabs completely. We've talked about this so many times. Their accomplishment was to create a Judaism that was not centered on the temple, even though half of rabbinic study was about temple topics, but it was about studying Torah, as opposed to sacrifices, as opposed to any of the other mitzvot. Yes, you're supposed to give tzedakah. The rabbis were not slouches in keeping all of the mitzvot, but they said the way that you're going to be able to keep the mitzvot is by studying the Torah and coming close to what God's mind is. I mentioned before, and I'll just repeat it. When I was sitting once with one of the ministers in town, and I asked the minister, so how exactly does a Christian these days keep Shabbos? The Torah, the Ten Commandments says, honor, remember, cherish, sanctify the Shabbos. How do you actually do that? And his answer is, Jesus is the Shabbos. Jesus is the fulfillment of the Shabbos. So by our embracing Jesus, that's it. We keep Shabbos.
Okay.
So of course, that's not what the decision was of the rabbis, but it was a pretty compelling decision for a lot of people out there in the world. A very different kind of decision.
But isn't the honoring Jesus in a way the ultimate honoring of the human being, the scholar, putting that person above the law, the study of the law?
And that's what the rabbis refused to do. They refused to put the scholars above the law.
Yeah.
They didn't put the scholars above the law. They didn't deify the scholars. They simply said that the scholars are the people who are doing what God is asking us to do, which is to devote ourselves to God's teachings. And that should be honored. I mean, again, in reality, it's a straw, it's what's it called? What do you call it? A straw man. It's a straw man because the rabbis are constantly doing the mitzvot. They're constantly doing all of this stuff. They're constantly figuring out what's the right way to do something, what's the wrong way to do something. So it's not like they're either or. They're doing all of that practical stuff. But what they're saying is the practical stuff is conditioned, defined, imbued with, study. All right. So now we're going to go into the next section. And this section is a continuation and a continual development of this topic overall, which is when you have two values in conflict. Mm-hmm. How do you adjudicate between the two of them? Where do you prioritize one over the other? Can we get some general rules? And what Rava now is going to say is, I know the hierarchy here, and I know the hierarchy here. I know the hierarchy here, but what about a different conflict? What about some other conflict? So he's going to bring in another conflict of mitzvot, two important mitzvot. Which one comes first? So, Josie, you're up. Rava said,
it is obvious to me that in a conflict between the mitzvos of sacrificial service and Megillah reading takes precedence, as can be proven from the statement of Rav Yosef bar Chanina.
Right. Okay. So he says, we had this already before. Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina studied the verse from the scroll of Esther, and he proved that the priests have to stop everything, even the sacrificial offerings, and they have to go and listen to the Megillah. So pshita, it's obvious, simple. This is no controversy. I got that.
Okay. Rava recites another undisputed ruling. In a conflict between Torah study and the Megillah reading takes precedence, since the rabbis of the school of Rabbi relied on a kal vachomer argument to interrupt their Torah study and go hear the Megillah reading.
Right. So this is also based on what we had before. Torah study was considered to be of a lesser weight than the sacrificial service. If the sacrificial service is bumped off by Megillah reading, and Megillah reading comes first, then certainly Torah study also gets bumped off by Megillah reading, and Megillah reading comes first. So this is all actually reviewing and accepting the stuff that we had before. Now we go into a little bit of some new territory. And it is also obvious.
It is also obvious to me that between Torah study and the obligation to bury an unattended corpse, the mitzvah of the unattended corpse takes precedence, since it is expressly taught in a Baraita. Torah study is suspended to take out the dead for burial and to accompany a bride from her father's house to the wedding hall.
Okay.
A strange juxtaposition.
So this is well, that's it's going in and coming out. This is an accepted early teaching that he quotes, and he says, "Good, I've got this teaching, so there's no difficulty for me. I have no conflict. I understand completely." So what's the juxtaposition? What's the conflict that is resolved? I'm studying Torah, but then I come across somebody who is a mate mitzvah. A mate mitzvah means someone who has nobody to take care of their burial. So if we look in the notes, we see that that's not what the teaching says. The teaching says we take a pause on studying Torah for a funeral, any funeral, right? So apparently that's not just the funeral of a sage, and it's not the funeral of somebody who doesn't have somebody to take care of them, any funeral. So we've expanded this back to that question, is this only for Torah scholars that we should stop? Apparently, no. Apparently, everybody, when you see a funeral procession come by, you should stop for that funeral procession, and you should give honor to the dead person and pause, right? And the same thing if there's a procession for a wedding. Stop what you're doing, stop your studies, and give honor to the fact that we have this new couple that is about to start their life together. So in these two cases, again, we have Torah study preempted, or at least put on hold, put on pause, by something that needs to be taken care of right now. You'll get back to your Torah study later. This is, again, clear. Okay? So this is, and we'll get to why he calls it Meit Mitzvah in a minute. Now, Rabbi says, but now I've got a question. So I've got all those three conflicts worked out perfectly in my mind. But now I've got another conflict. And actually, he's got another one that he thinks that he understands it. Go ahead.
Rava continues, in a conflict between the sacrificial service and the mitzvah of burying an unattended corpse, burying an unattended corpse takes precedence. And this is derived from the extra expression, or for his sister.
Okay, so we'll stop here for a second. So now we got the reason that he said mate mitzvah, which means an unattended corpse, a mate, a dead person, mitzvah, with the mitzvah on everybody to take care of their burial. In general, when somebody dies, it's the mitzvah on the family to take care of the burial. But if there's nobody else around, that's called a mate mitzvah. So then somebody who's nobody else is around, so then it's on you. So you have to do the burial. So he says, what happens if there's a priest who's supposed to be doing the sacrificial service, and on his way to do the sacrificial service, he sees an unattended corpse that's not been buried. So what does he do? Do he say, sorry, I'm on duty now to do the sacrificial service? Or does he have to answer the call of this moment, this emergency, that this person has nobody to bury him, he has to be the one? So the answer is the priest has to stop everything and do this. How do we know? So the answer is because we know this from reading, again, what we did in the Megillah, we're now going to do for a verse in the Torah itself. In the Torah itself, we have a long verse, and if you now read the note number 21, we haven't gotten to that in the text, but what happens is now the rest of this long paragraph is unpacking that derivation, that legal derivation. How do we know? We know it from v'la'achoto, from the word in the Torah, and for his sister. How do we know that? So let's read note 21.
Concerning the laws of a Nazir, one whose vow prohibits him from coming into contact with a human corpse, from cutting his hair, from drinking wine, or partaking of any grape product, the Torah states, he shall not come near to a dead body. This verse seems to include any corpse. However, the next verse states, he shall not make himself tameh for his father or for his mother, for his brother or for his sister, which stricture seems superfluous.
Okay, so this is the question. Once we had a general rule, he can't come near any dead body. He can't come near a corpse. That's the Nazir, right? So what do we need then afterwards, the Torah to say, for instance, he can't come near his father, he can't come near his mother, he can't near his brother, he can't near his sister, right? We got that. You said it originally, no corpse. So why are all of these people specified, these deceased people? So now what happens is that the rabbis took each one of these examples and they imagined a case that would add to the conflict. Go ahead.
The Sifri thus expounds on each component of the verse, thereby deriving various laws. From for his father, Sifri infers that the prohibition against defilement applies only to the Nazir's father's corpse, but not to an unattended corpse.
So here's the first step. The first step is the Torah says, don't come near any corpse. So then we would say that means really that's a general rule. That applies to every single corpse anywhere. So if a person is a Nazir and they're walking along on the road and they see an unattended corpse that hasn't been buried, well, the Torah told me I can't come near a corpse, so I can't come. So let somebody else worry about burying this mate mitzvah, this unattended corpse. So the answer is no. That's why the Torah said your father is not who you should be coming close to, right? So the way the Sifri, the rabbinic midrash says is, that's a known corpse that you know that there's a family involved. Other people will take care of the corpse. That's fine. You don't have to. You're out because you're a Nazir. But an unattended corpse? No, that doesn't fall into this category. An unattended corpse needs to be dealt with. So that's how we understand why the Torah specified your own family member, your father. But then the question is, okay, good enough. So why do we need the mother and the brother and the sister? So here we go.
Or for his mother, teaches that even if the Nazir is a Kohen and thus has an extra level of holiness, although he may not come into contact with his mother's corpse, he may become tameh for an unattended corpse.
Right. So tameh, ritually impure. That's what happens when you come in contact with the dead. So the way the rabbis read it now was, and why is the mother singled out? It must be that you have another argument that you want to add. You want to say, hey, I'm not only a Nazir, I'm also a priest. So come on, I'm doubly holy. So don't make me defile myself to take care of this corpse. Leave it alone. The answer is no. The Torah insists, no, it's your mother that you shouldn't be defiling yourself to. We know that there are other people in your family who can take care of it. But for an unattended corpse, doesn't matter how holy you are. You're a priest and you're a Nazir. Fine, very nice. But now you've got something that preempts any of that, taking care of this human body that needs to be buried. Next.
And for his brother, Sifrei derives that even if the Nazir is the Kohen Gadol and thus has an additional level of holiness, while he may not become defiled for his brother's corpse, he may become defiled for an unattended corpse. The Baraita now asks, what is to be derived from the superfluous or for his sister?
Right. So we have V'la'achiv, his brother, Ula'achiv, for his brother. His brother is the next step. Let's see what else this specificity. 1 second. Will add. The answer is, not only is he a Nazir, not only is he a priest, he's the high priest. And the high priest has an even higher level of stringency and holiness than anybody else. The high priest is forbidden to come into contact with any of their relatives at all. So we would think that in this case, maybe if a Nazir who is a priest, and not only that, a high priest to boot, maybe they're so holy that they shouldn't even come in contact with an unattended corpse. The answer is no. By saying your brother you shouldn't come in contact with, that's somebody from your family. Again, get the message. Read my lips, God says. It's those people that you shouldn't come in contact with. But somebody who has no family relations anywhere around, somebody who's unattended, this is an emergency, you have to do this. It's so important to take care of this dead person who has nobody else to worry about them. You have to suspend your own holiness and go and do this. That's how important it is.
It seems pretty timely because you read about people dying in hospitals alone.
I didn't want to get into that, but absolutely, we are now in this very horrifying situation where we can't keep track, we can't keep it pace. We know that there are people that have passed away that haven't been brought to burial yet because we can't. The system is overburdened right now. It's a terrible situation that we're in. It violates some, at least in our culture, some very, very deeply seated feeling that this is what it means to honor a person. Let's respectfully bring them to burial, and whatever that burial is. It could even mean, for some people, which I don't agree with personally or traditionally, but even cremations are on hold. They're backed up. So there's a kind of a limbo that people are in that is very, very sad and disturbing. But so this is where what the Jewish tradition says is, this is the mitzvah. Kavor tikbarenu. As soon as possible, bury the person. And if a person has nobody who can take care of this, then you have to. If you happen upon this person, you don't know this person from Adam. Nevertheless, this is the obligation. Geraldine, you wanted to say something. You have to unmute yourself. You have to unmute yourself.
You have to look for the
Isn't it written in the Torah that a Kohen is permitted to only for his immediate family, his mother, father?
A regular Kohen, yes, but not a Kohen Gadol.
Okay.
And not a Nazir. What a Nazir did by becoming a Nazirite was she voluntarily took upon themselves this extreme level of holiness. So it applies. The rules apply to the Nazir the way they apply to a high priest. Okay. So now what the rabbis were saying: what if you are a high priest? Then you're a high priest and you're a Nazirite. So maybe you should really, really not be getting in contact with any dead people. How do we expand the holiness even further? Your family is already included. So maybe it means even a person who is unattended. The answer is no. The unattended person has the right. That's a funny word to use. But their dignity must be honored by everybody and anybody, no matter how otherwise occupied they are with their own holiness. Sylvia.
I have a question. Oh, sorry.
Did you want to say something? Sylvia.
Yes, I did. I wanted to know what the difference was between a Torah scholar, a Nazirite, and a priest.
A Nazirite is somebody who took a vow. Took a vow to become, for 30 days or for some other amount of time, a kind of a quasi-ascetic, a holy person. They can be the biggest ignoramus in the world, but they want to be holy. And that's their desire to somehow come closer to holiness, was to dedicate themselves to this state of being a Nazirite. The way some people go and become a hermit. The way some people go and become, some other kind of ascetic figure. It has nothing to do with knowledge. It has nothing to do with what else you're doing with your life. It's a withdrawal from certain basic human interactions. A Torah scholar is a person who devotes themselves to the Torah. It's a completely different category. Meryl, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I have a question. Is it assumed that the unattended person is someone who is not known? The unattended person is a relative.
Right. If you knew who to contact to take care of the burial, then that person would not be unattended. Correct.
So what if it's a relative, for example, and you're the only one left in the family? There's nobody else in the family that can deal with
then
this.
That's not an unattended person. That person is attended by you.
Okay. So you could attend to them even if you are one of these categories.
Well, since there's nobody else, for sure. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Right. Yes. Okay, back to you now. Okay. Okay. So now the question is, what's this last term, the last relation, the sister? Why is she mentioned in the verse? We've been able to squeeze out categories from each of these other words. What is the velachoto? What is for his sister? that seems superfluous. It seems extra. Why is it mentioned? So if we read now from the top of the paragraph, Rabbi continues, in a conflict, read from the with the fourth line at the top of that column.
In a conflict between the sacrificial service and the mitzvah of burying an unattended corpse, burying an unattended corpse takes precedence. And this is derived from the extra expression, or for his sister. As was taught in a Baraita, or for his sister. What does the extra word teach? If one was going to slaughter his Pesach sacrifice, or to circumcise his son, and he heard that one of his relatives had died, it could be thought that he should not continue on his way, but should become tamei by burying the dead. You therefore say, do not become tamei. It could then be thought that just as he does not become tamei for his sister, but proceeds to slaughter his Pesach offering, so he does not become tamei even for an unattended corpse. Scripture therefore teaches, and for his sister, whence we infer that for his sister he may not become tamei, but he may become tamei for an unattended corpse.
Which is actually not may become, but must become.
Must.
So what happened was that we were first stacking up levels of holiness on this person. First, he's a Nazirite. Then he's a Nazirite and a priest. Then he's a Nazirite and he's a high priest. And in each of these cases, despite the fact that he has this holiness, he has to become ritually impure to do the sacred act of burying somebody who has nobody else to bury them. Right? That's what we had. Now we have one more word, v'la'achoto, or for his sister. And what do we do with that? It seems extra. The answer is we now go off into a different category of obligation. You're not necessarily a Nazir. You're not necessarily a priest. You're not necessarily a high priest. But you have a sacred obligation that is upon you right now.
Huh?
1 second, please. Sorry, I'm in the middle of a class. I'll talk to you later. So the obligation is, and there are two examples here. One is you're on your way. It's Pesach. It's right before Pesach, and you have to slaughter your Paschal lamb so that you'll have your Seder tonight with your Paschal lamb. This is a biblical obligation. So you're rushing to sacrifice your Paschal lamb, and your luck, you bump into right on the road, right in front of you, is an abandoned corpse. What do? So the learning that we have from the sages is, if this was somebody, again, like back to Meryl's point, if this was your sister, somebody that you know who has family members, and we know that somebody's going to take care of this, then you don't have to take care of it. Somebody else will take care of it. You have your mitzvah of offering your Paschal sacrifice. You have your mitzvah of making sure that on the 8th day this child will be circumcised. But the case of an unattended corpse, that's not your sister. That's this unidentified person or this unattended person. There are no relatives for this person to take on the obligation. Then you have to stop everything, even if it means that you don't get to make your Paschal sacrifice. You have to bury this person. This comes first. So again, a very stark and radical teaching, that even these very, very fundamental commandments, and these commandments are chosen here as being foundational, right? These are the commandments that start off Jewish identity on a national level and on an individual level for a male, of course, right? These are two mitzvot that are basic to starting the person as a Jew, right? To celebrate the Passover together was something that was the beginning of our history. And afterwards, we have the story in the Torah when people who were ritually impure because they had come in contact with a dead person. And they said to Moses, what do you mean everybody's going to be celebrating Passover and we're not going to be able to celebrate Passover? We want to be part of the Jewish people. What are we being thrown out because of this? And therefore, God had to institute another Passover for them so that they could be included. So here, what we're saying is, no matter how much the desire and the importance is for you to be part of the Jewish people, this dead human being needs you first, right? Okay.
I think what I get from this is that as a Jew, you cannot separate yourself from the Jewish community. You have obligations to all Jews, whether they're your family or not. Because this unattended corpse is a Jew with no one to take care of him or her.
Is it a Jew?
Ah, that's a good question, Rabbi. This could be any corpse?
Yeah.
Just a job.
How do you know if the person is Jewish? You don't know that the person is Jewish.
Ah, any corpse. Okay. Ah.
Okay, so now we have a whole bunch of scenarios of conflict where the conflict is clearly resolvable. We know what the hierarchy is, okay? And now we're going to be coming up to a question that's initially unclear and a question that brings us back to our topic. Go ahead.
Rava inquires, if the mitzvos of Megillah reading and burying an unattended corpse conflict, which one of them takes precedence?
So now, based on what we had before, look at how high we put a significance on reading Megillah. Right? Reading Megillah knocks off the priest doing the temple service. Reading Megillah knocks off studying the Torah. Reading Megillah is so important. Right? So now Rava says, wait a second, but I also have this other pyramid of significance where burying the unattended dead knocks off everything. It knocks off the temple service. It knocks off Torah study. So how do I now reconcile between those two? Which one do I choose?
Do we say that Megillah reading takes precedence because it publicizes the miracle God performed for us on Purim? Or perhaps burying an unattended corpse takes precedence because human dignity is at stake?
Okay, so let's pause here for a second and appreciate what we just got. Until now, we have been given a kind of a mathematical presentation of these different things. X is greater than Y, then if it's and Y is greater than Z, then X must be greater than Z. Or A is less than B and B is less than C, then C must be greater than A. It's all math. It's all which one is higher, which one is lower, which one is more, which one is less. We have a Torah verse that teaches us this. We have a verse from Megillah that teaches us this. Now we finally get into concepts. Now we finally actually get into what are the underlying values. Why is it? Why have we said that reading the Megillah is so much more important than all these other things? Why? Good, because the verse says so. But why is that? Why is the verse telling us this? What's the underlying value that the verse is communicating to us? The answer is that when we read the Megillah, we talked about this a little bit other times, what we are engaging in is persume nisa, is publicizing God's miracles. That God is the author of all existence, and therefore God can change things when God wants to. God can intervene in history. God can intervene in nature. God is above and beyond, and God cares enough at certain crucial moments to actually step in and do something, right? That's what we say, the last blessing that we say before we stand in silent prayer. Ga'al Yisrael, you have been the Redeemer of Israel. You have come and saved us in our moments of near extinction. We were at the banks of the Red Sea. You saved us. Right? So what the Megillah does is, and we've said this before, it takes what seems to have been a happenstance story. God's presence is nowhere acknowledged. And yet we say, no, this is exactly the point. This is why it's so important here, of all places, to acknowledge that this is through God's good graces that we were saved from destruction from Haman. Right? That's why it's so important to make the Megillah reading a priority for everybody, because it uncovers God's presence precisely in the world that we know too well. Biblical stories are wonderful old stories, but that's not the world we live in. We live in a non-biblical world, and that's the paradox of the Megillah. The paradox of the Megillah is to take the non-biblical reality and sanctify it as part of the Bible, right? And say God is there also. And that new principle, or that new perspective, is therefore so important that all the obvious stuff is put in abeyance. Studying the Torah, God's Torah, it's wonderful. But we know that. The Megillah is what we don't know. We need to make that a priority. Serving God in the temple, we know that the temple is God's house. We know how holy it is. We know how holy the priests are. That's all great. We'll never forget that. But if we don't do the Megillah, we won't get that point. So the Megillah comes first. So that's the underlying value that we have operating in that hierarchy. Now Rava says that that other pyramid that I just was going through, where the unattended corpse keeps pushing itself up into your obligation, no matter what other things you are, no matter how holy you are, no matter what holy acts you're supposed to be engaged in, burying this dead person comes first. He says, what's the value? What are we affirming when we do that? Is it simply a taboo? Oh my God, we don't want to have dead carrion stinking up the world. It's ugly, it's disgusting. It brings sickness or something like that. Is that what it's all about? So he now brings up explicitly something that hasn't been mentioned yet. What's the value that he labels as being the essential issue at hand?
After posing the question,
No. I'm asking. Let's get clear. What does he say is that value of burying that person?
Human dignity.
Human dignity. Human dignity. So let's understand it. The Hebrew term is kvod habriot. Right? The word kavod. What?
We are respectful because we're made in God's image.
Okay, that's one explanation of it. But let's just get the statement as it's stated. The dignity, the kavod of habriot, of human beings. So this is a whole big discussion, and it's not the only place in the Talmud where this gets discussed, and there are other texts and so on, and it's worth studying. Last summer, I devoted a whole semester in the conservative yeshiva to studying the texts and the teachings related to this. But one, you're giving an answer to an underlying question. What does it mean? What gives humans some kind of essential dignity? And why is that dignity so compelling and demanding of everybody else to be respected? We had a little discussion, a little exchange before, right, about honoring the Torah, and I made a big deal about the fact that honoring the Torah is in and of itself some absolute commitment that and value. What does it mean to say that human dignity is an absolute value? What does that mean? Where is this? Where is the human dignity? Where does it come from? So Geraldine answered, because we're created in God's image. So by giving respect to human beings, we're respecting God. Okay, what else? Any other ideas?
Well, I think of that saying of Hillel's, if I am only for myself, then what am I? That there's a connection among human beings.
Right. So the
Beyond.
connection between human beings. We have, in a couple of weeks, we're going to read, love your neighbor as yourself. On Shabbat, so I sang a little prayer. I take upon myself the obligation of my Creator who commanded me, love my neighbor as myself. Okay, and connectivity is something that we're struggling with these days, where we're all locked up in our own little houses. We want to be connected with other people. We want to. We're social animals and so on. We have social requirements. We create societies. Is that the same thing as human dignity?
Is that the connection you're saying? Mm.
Here's a person who, first of all, is dead. The person's dead. They don't know whether I love them or not. They don't know whether I'm I never knew this person. I have no connection with this person whatsoever. I'm taking this person and I'm going to put him in the dirt and cover them up with dirt, right? And what Rabbi is saying is this is about human dignity. It's not about social relations of people I know. It's not about talking to each other. It's not about anything like that. It's the physical being of a human that we say, you know what, it can't just be left there like carrion. It can't just be left there like roadkill or something like that, right? We are feeling something really fundamental in the physical, biological reality of another human being. Gesundheit, Sylvia. So, human dignity, yes, we can spiritualize it and say we're created in the image of God. But of course, what the heck that means is you can spend a few centuries on discussing that as well. And yet what we're saying is it doesn't mean our intellectual capacities. It doesn't mean our heart. It doesn't mean, it could mean all of those things, right? And when Maimonides talks about what does it mean when the Torah tells us we're creating, because God forbid that you should think that God has an image. That's not what it is. God doesn't have a body. And yet this body, this dead flesh, calls out to us, according to our tradition, to be treated with respect, right? The shell that we inhabit, supposedly it's my consciousness, it's my soul, it's my thinking or my feeling or whatever. And then there's this, and anybody that's had the sad experience of actually being in contact with a corpse, that flesh, it's like plastic. It's like it's not even like the meat that we get from the butcher. It's and yet what we're saying is no, this is
part of person.
This is of the highest essence. As a human being, we need to respect this. We need to respect this chunk of human flesh. Some people may be familiar with what happens in Israel when, God forbid, people get killed, and sometimes in battle or in a terrorist attack or accidents, traffic accidents. What happens when the body loses its integrity? When one piece of the body is here and another piece of the body is there, and there's a whole group of people
go
around, and their whole dedication is to save every shred of human flesh hold on a second, please. Sorry. Hi, Lisa, what's up? What did we say? 12? 12, yes. Okay, I'm in the middle right now of this. Well, I'll send you a link, okay? Good, bye. So,
Well, Rabbi, just to make a footnote here, I mean, there is a deep, obviously this isn't the Jewish perspective, but there's a deep, debate in Western philosophy, and Epicurus is the most prominent proponent of the view that when you're dead, you're dead. You can't be harmed, you can't be wronged. You really are a piece of flesh. And, we can create whatever construct we want around that, but a dead person can't be harmed anymore. And we should devote our attentions to the living, not to the dead.
So Judaism totally rejects that perspective.
Of course.
And it's strongly stating, something against that. And it's aware that there are people that think about it in their culture. They're exposed to classical thought, to the Roman and Greek thinkers that were all around them. There are different places in rabbinic literature where there are these debates. So they're aware of all that. You say Epicurus becomes the name for a heretic.
But I have a question I think that is more pertinent, which is, there's a kind of paradox within the paradox, because you have this whole class of people, or classes of people, the Kohanes and the Nazarites, who become Tamai if they have contact with the corpse, and yet there's this fundamental mitzvah in Jewish law to care for the dead. So, this idea that it's sort of a class-based thing, that some people fulfill the mitzvah by attending to the dead and some become contaminated when they attend to the dead, except in these circumstances where they're the only ones.
Let me clarify this, and then we're going to have to stop that phone call because I have to do my next thing. Let me clarify. Everybody becomes ritually impure by coming in contact with the dead. It's not a class thing. A priest becomes ritually impure. A regular Israelite becomes ritually impure. The problem with a priest is that the priest is on call and therefore has to be not ritually impure in order to be able to enter the temple. So that's the problem. It's like, everybody gets sick from the virus, but the doctor has to go into the hospital. The doctor can't get sick.
So if the priest fulfills this mitzvah because there's an unattended corpse, then what happens?
They have to get purified. They have to go through the whole ritual of purification. They're out of the temple for a few weeks.
Okay. Like quarantine.
Okay. Geraldine, you said you wanted to say something, and then we're going to have to conclude for today.
Just real quick, because I've had this experience with a friend of ours. Even an organ, when it's transplanted, has to be buried.
Absolutely. Right. I mean, even the foreskin at a circumcision has to be buried. So yes, every part of the human body needs to be treated as sacred, as against that other concept. Correct. A conscious negation of that idea. We'll continue, God willing, next week.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Yes, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you.